Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Today we have with us one of our favorite guests, Dr. Aaron Wilson. I hope that doesn't offend other guests we have on. But you want to introduce yourself for folks who might be new?
Yeah, hi. It's great to be back. Aaron Wilson, Ag Weather and Climate Field Specialist for OSU Extension, also the State Climatologist of Ohio.
Well, Aaron, we always lead off with the recent history. So do you want to give us a rundown of the winter we just had?
Yeah, maybe we'll step back a little bit farther this time, because I think the last time that we were with you from a weather perspective, we were still dealing with pretty intense drought conditions across the state. Certainly last year was a pretty bad year from a drought perspective, especially in southeastern Ohio, and then later in the season in northwest Ohio as it got dry there. And then we followed that up with Hurricane Helene impacts, and overall we were hoping for kind of a wet winter with a La Nina pattern, which we tend to always talk about on this show. But the La Nina pattern for the winter was sort of it was sort of meh. We had periods of wet weather and then dry weather, and then 10 days of a little bit damp and then dry, and overall it was about average. If you look at the 3-month period, December, January, February, I think 53rd wettest. So a lot of wetter years, a lot of drier years. There was enough moisture out there that helped recover some of the drought areas in southeast Ohio, but we're still abnormally dry. Even here in the 1st of April, conditions are abnormally dry over about 38% of the state. So we didn't have as damp of conditions. I was hoping we'd be a little bit more improved by this point. And kind of going along with that, conditions were cooler than average for January and February. After a warm December. So again, temperature-wise, we were right in the middle of the pack in terms of the last 130 years in terms of temperature. So about average overall. But cold enough, we got our snow this year. We especially if you were in central and southern Ohio, good snowpack. Mm-hmm. Not so much in northern Ohio though. So a lot of variability this winter, which we were expecting, but not quite as wet as what I had imagined we would be entering March.
I just couldn't get over how many days below freezing we had. I mean, it's been forever, it seems like. Well, yeah, because last winter our ground didn't even freeze, but then walking across the ground and seeing that heaving and stuff, and like, how long has it been since we've seen some of that to that extent?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a few years since we've had the persistent cold. We've had some big cold air outbreaks, thinking of December of 2022 when we had that really rapid drop in temperature. But one of the reasons that we had the snow stick around for almost 20 days, I think for a lot of us in central and southern Ohio, that was the longest snow period of snow depth on the ground in more than a decade.
Wow.
And certainly not rivaling the 70s, 77, 78. We averaged about 66 days of persistent snow cover in like the Dayton area back there. So, but it felt like we had snow a long time. And when you get those situations and the weather pattern that we had, it just allowed that cold air to stick around quite a long time. It was actually, in some aspects, insulating the soil a little bit, right? There was some concern about deeper frost depths and things across northern Ohio, where in the heart of the cold, that penetrated in January and February, we didn't have that snowpack to maybe protect the ground a little bit. So, I mean, it certainly was. I think what you've acknowledged some of those experiences we haven't seen in a while in our winters.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, my bathroom door tells me what the temperature is, and it only closes when it's like below freezing, and I could close it all winter long. So, yeah. So what does this mean for us as we move into spring? So you mentioned 1st of April, we are recording on April 1st. So we might have a little bit different perspective next week. But
sure.
As we're going through this spring, how's that going to pan out for us, do you think?
Yeah, so we had a pretty big switch in the weather pattern for March. We went from cold January, February to a very warm March, 3 to 8 degrees above average across the state. And if you're not in southwest Ohio and far northwest Ohio, those two areas picked up quite a bit of rain, well above average in terms of precipitation. but much of the eastern half of the state really tanked in terms of precip. Well below average precipitation. And in that area of southeastern Ohio, by the time we got to late March, we were really concerned about very rapidly slipping back into drought conditions. There's still folks down there that are hauling some water and some springs aren't running, but it's on a more isolated basis, right? There are long-term deficits in the soil out there, especially across southeastern and northwest Ohio. And I would argue even in areas that have been wet in March, still have deeper soil moisture deficits than maybe years past, like 2018, 2019. So that was one thing that we were really concerned. Now, as you mentioned, we're recording here April 1st, and now we've got what is an incredible forecast at hand for the next several days, with widespread 4 to 6 inches of rain coming through. Basically, well, it'll be multiple rounds of showers and storms that we're expecting this week, some severe again. So one thing we've not seen as much severe weather as at this point last year, and we can talk about, again, not having a warm winter meant maybe a little bit later start in our severe weather, right? Mm-hmm. Last February, very warm. First tornado outbreak on the 28th that came through Molly Karen and other areas. So, but we'll have some more severe weather, I think, here this week before, this is broadcast, but the rain is really... That's a lot of rain that's forecast. So we'll see where we are, obviously, by the time we visit you in this podcast. We need the rain, obviously, to help with those deeper soil moisture levels.
Yeah, hopefully some of it comes slow, because we know from a soil physics perspective that capillary action is really important to reconnecting our surface water with our groundwater. And yeah, I'm with you. I don't know that we have that deeper soil moisture connected yet to really effectively infiltrate some of this. So we really need some slow soaking rains.
Yeah, another data point for that is that you can look at the stream flow gauges, the river gauges, and even in the rain that we have had, there's been a little bit of an uptick in river gauges, and then they're right back below normal, which is telling us, there's a little bit of surface runoff, but the soil is still really ingesting that moisture, and so it's not giving up a lot subsurface flow to our rivers and streams right now. So it's a good sign that we still need to recover some of our soil moisture.
Yeah, we've noticed that with Deer Creek when we thought there should have been a little bit of overflow or flooding with rain, and it's not happened yet. That's interesting. Good perspective there. Mm-hmm.
So with this forecast, hopefully we're going to hear from future Aaron here in a moment and tell us that it wasn't as bad as predicted.
Yeah. And following the rain, right now in the forecast, it's, the week of April 7th through the 14th, even 7th through probably the 20th of April, pretty strong probability of below average temperatures. So we're going to follow this rain with cold temperatures, probably some nights in the 20s. I think it's really going to slow things down for those folks that are really wanting to get out there.
Hi there. Future Aaron here, as promised, to talk about the conditions over this past weekend. Certainly, as forecast, we had significant amount of rainfall across the state, anywhere from 2 inches across northeastern Ohio to creeping over 7 inches in parts of southwest Ohio. So plenty of, increasing flood risk throughout last weekend into the first part of this week here as we sit now on April 8th. A lot of the rivers have crested and are fallen, including the, parts of the Scioto and even Ohio River. The Ohio River crested just over 60 feet there in Cincinnati. So there's been a lot of flooding in the Cincinnati region, but also along the Scioto River and some aerial flooding in other places. But actually it was kind of good, I guess, to see, some standing water out there in a lot of places that hadn't seen it. Some farm ponds refilling and some rivers full to their banks now. So that has eased our drought concerns now heading into the springtime or throughout the upcoming planting season here. We're still carrying long-term rainfall deficits over the last year or two. So we'll have to monitor that closely as we get into the hotter part of the season, June, July, August, for any rapid onset drought conditions. But right now, compared to past me earlier in this recording, conditions have eased quite a bit across the state. We do get an opportunity to dry out, albeit a little bit chilly this week, certainly within the realm of possibility or typical conditions here in April. But we'll dry out, I think, a little bit, have a few passing systems here and there over the next few weeks. But I think we're slowly going to get a little bit of better conditions as we head toward the end of the month to resume some of those field activities and planting activities out there. So those drought concerns have eased just a bit, and we're looking forward to some opportunities here to get out into our fields.
Hopefully we get planted a decent time frame, get this crop off to a good start. So what is it looking like this summer?
Yeah, so right now our forecast in terms of precipitation is heavily weighted to what we have, what we're seeing in our models in April, which is wetter conditions. So overall, we'll probably have a wetter spring in March, April, May. But I see the conditions waning from wetness to more back to maybe kind of typical May, June conditions. So get things in, and the windows are looking like they're there for our kind of prime planting time period there throughout the month of May. And temperatures look reasonable too, likely to be slightly above average when we look back at the entire season. And then as we head into the summer, even more of that easing of that wet pattern. Typically, in the summertime, you might get 6 or 7 inches of rain in an isolated location. Mm-hmm. That's what makes something like what's happening here in the first week of April pretty severe, because you're talking huge amount of area receiving all of that water. Summertime, we can get these locally heavy downpours. But right now, temperatures look to be probably a little bit above average this summer. And I think this time of the year, I'm always cautioning folks, think long-term trends. Overnight lows are warmer, but not necessarily daytime highs. In precip, right now, no strong signal either way. And so it looks, to me, when I look at the forecast, I still see plenty of opportunities to get in, get planted, get things emerging really well. Avoid some of the late planting that happened in Northwest Ohio last year, maybe, and just have a good, decent growing season. We all, I think, deserve a nice, normal, peaceful growing season, although there's always something to talk about, which is why you bring me back so often.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to severe weather a little bit in the springtime, we just went through a storm this past Sunday, what I'm now referring to as the T word in my house, since my daughter's still traumatized from tornadoes last year. So I'm just curious what actually it turned out to be. Were there tornadoes on the ground? What are you seeing this year that's different than last year?
Yeah, so last year we ended up actually breaking our observed record. We had 74 tornadoes across the state last year. The previous record was 62 in 1992. And looking at trends, it's a little bit difficult because we all have cell phones. We take images of the tornadoes. Everybody seems to capture them on video. So we observe a lot more tornadoes than we did in the 50s and 60s. So looking at trends is a little bit difficult. But 74 tornadoes is a lot for Ohio, when our typical average is 20, 21, or 22, something like that per year. So well above average last year. And as we mentioned earlier, the early season warmth last year likely led to those conditions being really good for severe weather earlier in the season. We had our first tornado outbreak on February 28th, and we didn't look back. I think we had more than 60 tornadoes by the end of April. So we had quite a few. So this year, with the cooler January, February, conditions weren't as conducive to severe weather earlier in the season, nor was the weather pattern one that has been very active until here in late March and the start of April, getting really active now, fairly active. So we had 4 confirmed tornadoes in Southwest Ohio just this past week, relatively weak, 3 EF0s and 1 EF1 near Jeffersonville. Yeah, this is severe weather season. This is the time to prepare, to get ready, to know that, we see a lot of different types of extreme weather and severe weather in Ohio, and it's always good to be prepared for those heading into this bulk of the severe weather season for Ohio, which is April, May, and June.
When Aaron, you're leading a project right now looking at helping farms be ready for events like this. What kind of recommendations are we starting to spin up from that? Yeah,
so we're working with, thanks to Nationwide Insurance and the AgTech Innovation Hub award and program, thinking about ways of becoming a little bit more resilient to extreme weather, changing weather patterns over time. We've assembled, with the help of you two as well, a great group of educators, extension educators around the state that are investigating what it means to have resilience to these, both in farm and sort of on farm decision making, but also from more of a not necessarily in the field strategies, more on the side of insurance, building integrity, being able to withstand higher wind speeds, look at things that maybe borrowing from hurricane research or others that we can apply on the farm to make them more resilient to tornado outbreaks or extreme wind. So it's been really nice to see and have these educators thinking about these topics, and at the same time having Nationwide there to talk about the insurance side of things. No doubt it's a very challenging insurance environment, given the fact that we're seeing extreme weather increases in different areas all across the globe, which is really straining the insurance and reinsurance companies out there. So it's really timely, and I think it's been a really good opportunity to explore some of those things among the group. We've sort of looked at how can we improve our curriculum here in Extension, our teaching tools to help our stakeholders and farmers become better prepared, whether that's working with livestock, whether it's working with our row crops, working with our ag lenders and construction companies as well, or folks that are building, perhaps thinking, how are we building our barns? Mm-hmm. How we were preparing more for extreme drought conditions like we saw in 2024. So all of this can come together and really just provide the necessary information for farmers to explore, find out if it fits their farm and fits their operation, and become more resilient to these extreme weather events.
Yeah, being part of that project's been really interesting for me because we spend a lot of time, I think both as Extension folks and even as farmers, thinking about some of those more immediate and common concerns, especially with crop production, of the droughts, the floods, the hail, the wind, where really a lot of those, we've got crop insurance and yeah, they're awful, but we manage really well for managing those risks. When we start talking about these maybe lower risk events or lower likelihood events that are still very high risk for your property, especially if you're in a livestock operation, it's really changed my way of thinking about how we can be resilient to those events. We see more tornadoes. We've been seeing more straight line winds. Snow load was an issue. We talked about the snow earlier. Snow load on some of these roofs, hoop houses, things like that. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, that we're discovering through these conversations that we can be more aware of, like you said, out of the field.
Yeah, and we've really taken the approach of the scalable idea, I guess, because you got to find that balance, right, between what is going to help you be more resilient, but also like how much money are you going to spend to do it? Because the risk is certainly there. So it's balancing that risk, balancing that expense, and everyone's going to be different. We understand that people have different risk tolerances. Even across Ohio, there's different risks to these weather extreme events. So I like that approach, and I think that's going to be really helpful to people as we start to roll out some of these materials, kind of a buffet or bite-size parts to help you on the farm develop resilience at your own pace.
Yeah, it could be as simple as knowing things like your geography.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the county, your farm is located. Know your surrounding county. It seems kind of trivial, but just knowing that when there's warnings and watches out too, emergency preparedness goes hand in hand with some of these more resilient strategies that we just talked about. So yeah, we want to just provide, weather touches all of our lives in some form or capacity. And certainly when these events happen, like you said, they may be low risk for any particular area, but they really, or I should say low occurrence. I did the same thing. Mm-hmm. Low occurrence maybe, but the risk to damage of life and property is really significant.
Yeah, if you guys can't tell, we're really excited for a future podcast where we're going to share some of these tools and resources that we're going to finish up here in the next few months. So we're really excited to share that with you guys and hopefully build a more resilient farm community in Ohio.
Well, Aaron, why don't you share out some of your resources people can be on the lookout for as they're trying to work through planting?
Yeah, certainly. So we provide monthly and quarterly climate summaries. So you can find those and sign up for an email, climate.osu.edu. That's the State Climate Office's website. We do have ongoing drought resources available. We'll see if we're still talking about drought here as we get into April, but we have those available at go.osu.edu/Ohio drought. And so those are, I think, a couple of good resources. And of course, always come back and listen to our summer update in just a few months here.
Yep. Well, thanks again. It's always fun to talk to you about weather.
Thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners. Just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.